Happy Friday. It's Friday, May 15th. I love that with Governor Cuomo. Today is Wednesday. Today is Friday. Today is actually Friday, May 15th. This is Music Cities Together Live. I'm Michael Bracy, joining you from just outside of Washington, D.C. We are thrilled, as always, to have you. We know that all of you are extraordinarily busy. You have a lot on your plate, a lot of time, and you're zoomed out. But the fact that you're spending an hour with us means a lot. So welcome, and we're thrilled to have you. The focus of our program, for those of you who have not joined us before, again, is the whole question of how music and cities are interconnecting in this time of crisis. This program is a presentation of Music Cities Together, which is a collaboration between the Music Policy Forum and Sound Music Cities. During the next hour, we're going to be talking about some developments that have been happening around the intersection of music and public policy. And then we've got a couple of fabulous guests that I think you're all going to enjoy talking to. Some housekeeping. As the day goes on, our unbelievably wonderful producer, Alex Dolvin, is going to be putting some links that are referred to into the chat window just to reference some websites and other materials that we're going to be talking about throughout the day. If you have questions for our guests, we encourage you to put them into the Q&A tab, which you'll see below, and it should be at the bottom of your window. So we'll be trying to navigate questions as we go throughout the day. So again, thank you for spending time with us. And also, again, all of our programs are archived on YouTube on our Music Policy Forum YouTube channel, which you can find from Googling us, or I think the link is out there in the invitation that you received for today's program. So before we turn to our guests, a couple of quick updates in terms of developments from the past week. Piece of really spectacularly good news, King County, Washington, was able to pass some venue support language in a COVID relief bill that they got through earlier this week. I believe it's about $1.8 million in direct support for local venues. Don't quote me on that. I've had a lot of numbers jumbling around my brain, but it is a really important show of support for King County's venues, and something that we hope that other jurisdictions are going to look at as they're navigating their own support plans moving down the road. And again, we give, it looks like, yes, $750,000 for venues, not $1.8 million, but it's a start. Anyway, we give Dow Constantine and Kate Becker and the entire team out in King County, including the venues who've been advocating this, huge thanks and appreciation for their work on this. Other news in Washington, as you may be following, it feels like this is the third Friday we've had this program where Congress is taking up relief legislation. The House of Representatives is expected to vote later today on the next phase of COVID-related relief, which is in all likelihood the last bunch of money that will be spent this calendar year, if it is able to get through the House and then the Senate and overcome the president's current opposition to the bill that's in the House right now. Currently, it's about a $3 trillion measure. I know our colleagues with the National Independent Venue Association are fighting very hard to try to have specific venue relief in that bill. We know that other arts advocates are working hard to try to get money for the broader arts ecosystem and the National Endowment and all the other sort of ways that we get our money out to the arts community. Again, that bill is expected to pass the House in one version today. It'll be go into a challenging negotiation with the Senate, who in all likelihood will pass their own version down the road, and then they'll have to be conferenced. But again, we don't know what that looks like. I think for a lot of people, again, in this conversation, one of the dynamics that a lot of us know and think about, certainly this is something that our first guest thinks a lot about, but maybe a little bit of a new concept to some of us, is a lot of that money is going to be directed towards state and local governments whose budgets are being absolutely devastated by what's happening with the loss of tax revenue and just the kind of increase in service needs as part of the economic crisis that we're in. And so even though we're not anticipating a lot of direct support for artists, specifically set aside for artists or for the music community, that money going towards states and cities is going to be very important in terms of shoring up the overall safety net and all kind of a broader cultural infrastructure. So we'll all keep a close eye on that. Finally, We are very excited, to let y'all know that the Reopen Every Venue Safely program, the REVS program that we talked about on last week's show, is fully launched and running. We had our first meeting yesterday with our 10 U.S. pilot cities, communities, which are Albuquerque, Austin, Chicago, Cleveland. Oh my God, I had the 10 memorized and I've lost it. Charlotte, King County, Washington, Los Angeles, Louisville, Kentucky, New Orleans, and Portland. I got it. We are off and running. The local groups are organizing. It's really fun to see, really exciting to see. And we're going to be able to talk a little bit about REVS with both of our guests today. So that's a project that we're very excited about and appreciative of all of your support and ideas. Again, I think Alex put the link in the chat for that, but that's at musiccitiestogether.org/REVS if you want more information or if you want to sign up for REV specific updates. So with that, I am super excited to welcome our first guest. Our first guest has been working in the cultural community for a long time. Again, all of us feel like we're getting older, so we want to be mindful of the balance between we've been doing this work for a minute and we haven't been doing it for so long, but Shelle Sanchez, Ph.D., a planner, facilitator, collaborator. I like this word too, optimist, is in your bio. But for the last several years, she has been the Director of Cultural Services for the city of Albuquerque. And we are thrilled to have you join us today, Shelle. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here or there. I guess that's one of the great things about this strange world we're living in. We get to be a lot of places all at once. So thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, so we want to start like big picture, because again, a lot of our audience members may have a vision in their mind of New Mexico and Albuquerque that possibly was informed by popular culture or maybe some television programs, but haven't had a chance to get out to your neck of the woods. And maybe if you could start by just painting a little bit of a picture of the Albuquerque cultural scene and kind of what's happening in New Mexico, again, pre-crisis. Like, how do you think about it in terms of normalcy in Albuquerque?
Oh, absolutely. So I grew up here, so I am definitely a high desert girl. And I think if you see Albuquerque through the lens of maybe Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, it's totally fine. Love those shows. And we joke that Albuquerque is one of the main characters in Breaking Bad, and all the vistas and gorgeous landscape, that's what it looks like here. So if you want to come, that's what you're going to see. The other things that are here is a very, very vibrant and connected cultural community. There's a lot of artists that live in Albuquerque. Sometimes our friends to the north, Santa Fe, get a little bit of lion's share of the love when it comes to being a home of arts, but really Albuquerque has so many musicians, visual artists. We have an incredible number of festivals, music festivals, food festivals, cultural festivals throughout the year. So it's a really amazing place to be. We have free outdoor music like 4 nights a week during the summer. If you're willing to cruise around town, there's just really beautiful free concerts. And so that was, of course, before. And now we're getting into the beautiful summer months. And as everyone is, a lot of things have really shifted very quickly. So what hasn't changed is we still have amazing artists here. They're still really motivated. They're all trying to find ways to share their art, create art, and if they're musicians and performers, figure out, what are the ways that they still get to perform and share and connect with their audiences. So, we're here to try to help them figure out how to do that the best we can.
Thank you. And I'm also always struck in New Mexico that there's a real high level of public cultural infrastructure. And I know you previously served at the National Hispanic Cultural Center, which is a remarkable state-funded operation and campus. You also have a mayor right now in Albuquerque who is a total metalhead. I mean, that's kind of different and interesting.
Yeah, so a couple things about that. one of the things about New Mexico and Albuquerque is we're a relatively poor state, and by some measures, by some of those economic measures that we could argue about. But the result is that most of our cultural infrastructure is publicly funded. So our museums, our many of our theaters, our libraries, things that sometimes in other cities would be private museums, would be even a private zoo. Here, it's all publicly funded, which means a lot of good things, honestly, because there's a lot of stability in that public funding most of the time. Right now is a little bit of a hard time for a lot of public funding, but it's still probably more stable than a lot of nonprofits right now. The other amazing thing about Albuquerque right now is we do have a mayor who does love heavy metal music, but and I have some updates about that if anybody's interested. But the other thing to know about him is he's a huge supporter of the arts in general. He has a degree in art history, which is not a common degree for mayors, and so he loves visual art as much as he loves music. But when it comes to music, it's definitely the metal music. So he is legitimately the metal mayor. I asked him in preparation for today what he's been listening to. So the bands that are on his solace and inspiration during these times are In Flames, particularly their album I, The Mask, very appropriate. And a clutch is the album Transnational Speedway that has lots of songs about bizarre, fanciful Armageddons. So if you need something on your playlist, that's from Mayor Tim Keller here in Albuquerque.
Well, and I think, what's so interesting about that, Shelle, is I think there are a lot of parallels between Mayor Keller and County Executive Constantine, who visited with us last week, because feeling alignment with music as being authentically part of your identity and part of your community as an elected official gives you a little bit of a different orientation, as opposed to if you are coming in with, being a music appreciator or a fan, but not really having that sense of self. And Mayor Keller has spoken very movingly, I feel like, about, again, when he talks about his love for metal, like, this is not like I listen to AC/DC, like he is into, he's very sincerely into, for not to be disrespectful, but I think it's fair to say kind of niche, metal bands and smaller independent metal bands, or bands that don't have widespread international fan bases. And he speaks very movingly about what that music and what that expression has meant to him, essentially becoming himself and being part of a community. And again, we always talk about this as music community is a word that we use very intentionally. And if you have been touched by that and then you're in elected office, that then will show itself in your priorities and how you think about what is the role of music in culture. And it's not about metal, it's about the global experience or the macro experience of art. It could be a musical genre, it could be dance, it could be theater, it could be a connection between art and your identity and what makes you you. And when Mayor Keller came into office several years ago, I know he brought you in and Hakeem Bellamy and others to really kind of create, a vision of cultural services in the Albuquerque community that, again, absolutely zero disrespect to previous administrations who also had really ambitious and thriving cultural affairs strategies. And this has always been a big part of Albuquerque's DNA. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you've been trying to do over the last couple of years and kind of how the cultural side of this fits into the broader sort of agenda of the city.
Well, one of the things because you touched on it a little bit, so cultural services at the city of Albuquerque is a very large department. And so I mean that in all measures, we oversee 33 properties, we oversee 7 divisions, 2 museums, 2 theaters, or actually 3 museums, 2 theaters, 18 libraries, our biopark, which includes our zoo, botanic gardens. So it's lots of property, $40 million plus budget, plus capital, almost 500 people. So that in and of itself is a big daily job. And all of that's amazing. But the other thing that we are really committed to, and this is something that Mayor Keller has really been behind us on, is making sure that cultural services is also serving our arts and cultural community, the nonprofits, the individual artists, because it's, you know, it's a big day job to take care of all of the cultural institutions that are under the city's purview. But what makes Albuquerque amazing on a day-to-day basis is really the incredible vibrancy of all of our arts and cultural nonprofits. We have so many long-standing and unique organizations. You know, we have a mariachi festival every year. We have the largest Flamenco Internacional Festival every June, or maybe not this June, but every June. And this is the largest flamenco festival outside of Spain. It's just a phenomenal event. We also have the Gathering of Nations, which is a very important and large gathering of Native Americans, not just from all over the US, but from other First Nations all over the world. So this is what happens in Albuquerque all the time. And we've really tried to find those ways that we can support that work that we know is the true vibrancy of our community, beyond just making sure all of our buildings are okay.
All right. So with that framing, let's get into the harder part of the conversation, which is what we talk about every Friday and what we all are feeling, which is all of us, no matter what hat we wear, have all these amazing, ambitious plans and visions for what this year is going to look like and how we're serving our different communities and the mechanics of what our year is going to look like in our teams. And of course, that implodes. And now we all have to start from scratch and try to figure out what is the new reality that we're dealing with, what do we have control over, where are we needed, you know, all those pieces. And I know you all have been really hustling to kind of figure out where the city can play a role in supporting your community and your constituents. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some of the pivots that you've made and some of the priorities that you've got moving over the next couple of months.
Right. Well, thankfully, again, because we're part of an administration that came in believing that arts and culture and the creative economy is essential to how we live, and also understanding that in Albuquerque and New Mexico, the creative economy is more than 10% of our economy, more like 11 or 12% of workers. And that's a huge share of economic vibrancy here. So we were able to pivot pretty fast and put out about $500,000 in a variety of opportunities for our creative economy. $300,000 came from our Urban Enhancement Trust Fund. So that, again, is something that's been in place here in Albuquerque since the 80s. And it was a group of city councilors who were very forward thinking and put over $7 million into a city trust fund. And we've been granting from that money ever since then. So usually we grant every 2 years from that. We were able to get the mayor's approval and city council's approval to put a new an extra cycle in the middle, and we got that money out pretty fast. And so that ended up going out to 66 of our arts and cultural nonprofits, some of whom and festivals that I just referred to. So that was pretty quick. We did that in about 4 or 5 weeks. We also took some of our money because we oversee the public access channels here in Albuquerque. So we were able to take some of the money that we use for contracts to create content, and we shifted it a little bit real quick. We call it DIY media, so do-it-yourself media, and that has really gone out to artists, lots of performers, a lot of musicians to create content. So we have a contract with them. Might be $200, it might be $1,000, might be $2,500, depending on how many minutes or hours they're doing of content. They give that back to us. We put it on our public access, and then of course stream it on our social media channels and YouTube. So that's been great because that actually got into the hands of artists really quickly. And it was very flexible. We got all kinds of really beautiful and fabulous and wacky and kind of surprising ideas for content to put on public access, but that's what it's there for. So that was pretty amazing. And then we also took a piece of the money to invest in our youth, because that is one of the other things that both the mayor, myself, Hakeem have been dedicated to for a long time. We have $50,000 in paid internships this summer for our recent high school graduates that are looking at having careers in arts fields, arts professionals, arts administrators, so that we can still kind of point people and mentor them in to future careers as arts leaders.
That's, yeah, I think so interesting. And just to clarify, a lot of these resources, I'm under the impression a lot of these resources were a very fast repositioning of understanding that the city's presenting schedule is going to be completely shut down, basically. So you're able to kind of repoint some of those resources into the direct aid or direct sort of packages that you put together.
Right, and we also had to cancel a lot of our city events, and a lot of that money had to just go into direct savings because, like a lot of cities, significant portion of our budget comes from gross receipts taxes, which have shifted very much in the last few weeks. So we were able to, by working creatively with an administration that believes in the arts, we were able to reposition some of that money. The Urban Enhancement Trust Fund money, though, that is money, that's not our general fund, and that's money that's there all the time because people came together and made a long-term investment that continues to pay off all the time. So, I think those are some of the things that we have to think about right now. Maybe we can't do them right now. Nobody's got probably an extra $7 to $10 million, or maybe the equivalent of 20 at this point. But when we make those like long-term investments, it's amazing when they pay off for us in these times of crisis. Yeah.
So thinking about the months ahead and thinking about reopening, first of all, what do you feel comfortable sharing about kind of the dynamics around the city-state conversation, the public health conversation? Again, I don't want you to say, put you on the spot in terms of anything that would be challenging to say in an open forum, but we know that a lot of communities, part of the challenge in our creative services sector is just figuring out not only timing and sequencing, but also protocols and who's making those decisions and who's got kind of the pathways to those different kind of decision makers. Can you speak at all about what you're sensing in Albuquerque around reopening timing and protocols?
Yeah, I think the reality, and this is something that we have been asked to do, not just within cultural services, but really our whole city. We have a layer of plans, and we have, what we want to do, what we know we can do soon, and we have opening dates that we're shooting for, knowing that really depends at the end of the day on how we're all kind of behaving and taking care of ourselves as a community when it comes to public health. And so we don't see any of our inside venues opening before July, and I think July is very optimistic, to be honest. And so, but we're still making plans for what that looks like when they open. So I think that's one of the most important things, especially for those of us that are in public service and public spaces, is we have to be prepared. So when the opportunity arrives, we can act right away. And again, one of the good things about being a public facility is that we all know our revenues are going to be down. We have other sources. So if we're able to continue to pay our staff, if we can fill these gaps in our city budget, we're not as reliant on the revenue from ticket sales. And that means that we can ideally, which I hope we're able to do when we get back, partner with our arts organizations, our presenting partners, because we have some amazing partners here in the city of Albuquerque. We have Outpost Performance Space, which just does the best places for jazz and just brings in the most amazing people. We have AMP Concerts, again, an amazing, amazing group here in Albuquerque that's still managing to support musicians through this time and make really interesting things happen in different kinds of ways. And so, I hope that when we can reopen as the city, we can really make it possible for people to make a concert work with 30% occupancy, right? Because we don't have to show the revenue, especially in a year like this.
Right. No, that's interesting, and also gets into a lot of issues that we're going to be unpacking over the next couple of months, because again, when I said at the beginning, we're trying to all think about this step by step, in terms of what are the baby steps we have control over. And again, through the REVS initiative, which we're thrilled that Albuquerque is a pilot city, we're really honing in on those, real specific issues of like, what is the relationship between the venues and public health officials? How are we communicating the reality of what's happening to our music workers and to our audiences and those kind of, that box. And then, clearly as we move into the year, we're going to have much bigger issues around the macroeconomics of the music community as it relates to artists, as it relates to, again, music workers and venues. There are complexities in every city about the balance of, public presenters, so public infrastructure going towards putting on festivals and shows versus the private industry, and how do those coexist? Where does philanthropy fit into that? I mean, there's a lot of really difficult and complicated questions that I think we all are struggling with, and there are no easy answers for. And like I said at the beginning of the program, the reason we do this work is that the structures weren't really optimal anyway, before the shutdown. So, it's sort of like we're taking a challenging set of circumstances for the entire music ecosystem, putting it through the wood chipper, and then we're going to kind of figure out what comes out on the other side. And maybe it can be woven together into a beautiful blanket or some analogy like that. So,
yeah. I just wanted to say, I want to say something really nice about this initiative, the REVS initiative. In these other spaces that we oversee and manage, like our biopark, we and the museums, they're very large accrediting bodies and this really tight network of organizations that work together because they're accredited through these organizations, right? So they have conferences and they have really good communication, which means that they're sharing information in real time. That makes it so much easier for all of us, all of the individual spaces, to make really good decisions about how to do things safely, when to do them, where the best practice is, all of this. So I'm really glad you're doing this because I think it's kind of missing for some of the theaters, just because of the nature of theaters and performance spaces. They don't have this natural connected body where we're just sharing the kind of information. It tends to be a lot more informal circles or people that have worked together. So to me, this is very important work. We are thrilled to be part of it as we push forward. I'm really glad that you've taken the lead.
Well, thank you, Shelle. We're thrilled Albuquerque is part of it. We're going to learn a lot from you over the next couple of months. And Alex will put into the chat window the link to the Cultural Services webpage that has information on some of the programs, initiatives that you've been running. And again, thanks, Shelle, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's fabulous to be here.
Thanks. And we're going to turn now to our next guest, the unstoppable Erin McKeown. Erin, are you with us?
I think I'm with you.
Oh my goodness. Hello, friend.
Hey, friend. Thanks for this call. It's really nice to see you, and it was great to hear what Shelle had to say.
Before we start, that's a very impressive background you've got there. I don't know if you've seen the Twitter feed that's rating remote backgrounds from Zoom calls, but you got a...
This is a new one today. I usually sit on my couch and have something else, but I was tired of it. So today I decided to show you my giant Megan Rapinoe poster.
There it is. Oh, there she is.
Background.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain to you just how big that is. It's quite hard. But yes, this is my house.
I imagine. So many of you attending today's conversation know well of Erin and her music and her activism and all the wonderful things she brings to the world. For those of you who are new to the Erin McKeown experience, we're going to put a link to her website up in the chat. But Erin is a spectacular songwriter, performer, composer, activist, connector, thought leader, entrepreneur, educator. Erin just fits into all the little areas that we work on here at Music Cities Together and Music Policy Forum. And she's been a friend and a colleague for a long time. And we've always really valued her take on the world and the idea that Erin is an independent artist that has been making her way through a shifting and complicated music landscape for now 20 years. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about a couple things. One is we're going to take a little mini tour of Erin's career, because as we are at this moment where we are all collectively are heading into a new normal that we don't know what it looks like yet for working musicians and for the broader community, it's interesting, we think, to reflect a little bit about the shift that's happened over the last 20 years, and that musicians like Erin have been basically helping reinvent a music industry and a music community on the fly, through that time, and learning a lot of lessons along the way about the possibilities and the challenges of the shifting landscapes. So we're going to talk a little bit about the last 20 years, not to date you, dear friend. We're going to talk a little bit about a couple of the interesting sectors that Erin's been working in, and including musical theater and education. We're going to talk a tiny bit about life up in the boonies and running a virtual career from a rural part of the world. And then we're really going to dig in on this whole Revs question and what does reopening look like from a standpoint of a working musician, and what are the things that you are going to look to see as it's time to get back on the road. So let's back up, and again, we'll encourage you, if people on the program have questions for Erin, pop them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can over the next 25 minutes or so. But let's start back to the baby days of the year 2000, and your first record's coming out, and you're coming out of Fredericksburg, you're coming out of Virginia. What is that experience like? What is the world looking like to a young Erin McKeown as you kind of first enter your way into the music industry?
First of all, I think you might want to add the description. Maybe I'll just wipe away all of those things you just described me as and say canary in the coal mine.
Right.
That's
right.
My career. Right. I feel like you have been and the various organizations that you founded and worked with have been companions with me along that journey of like, hey, the Erin here doesn't feel right, and what are we going to do about it? So, it's been interesting to have the pandemic as this now reflection of the work that we've done in the last 20 years. We'll get to that. I wasn't aware much of the music business when I came out of Virginia. I was not from a family that, remember when records used to come out on Tuesdays? Like, I didn't know what a Tuesday meant.
Right.
You know what I mean? And we didn't have cable. I missed like the greater business part of the music industry. I didn't know anybody that was a professional artist. I just wrote songs and went to college, and then started to see the music industry. But what I saw in 1997, when I first started playing gigs, was the power of a mailing list, was the power of having an object like a CD to give to someone, and was the power of like boots on the ground, word of mouth, like concentric circles moving outward. And that is a dinosaur way to build a career now. It doesn't exist in the same way. It was pre-internet world. So, yeah, and the engine, I think, of that career financially until the early 2000s was selling music. And then we all know how that has changed. But that's where I started from, was from a very like organizing grassroots, non-internet place.
And then you sort of went through a phase where you realized that a lot of the things that were necessary to kind of organize and manage a career were things that you were capable of figuring out on your own.
Yeah, I've had a kind of almost bell curve experience of teams and people helping me. So in the early days, at this time I was talking about a mailing list, separate circles and small gigs. I was doing everything myself. So yes, I learned how to program websites. And yes, I learned how to communicate with the person that was going to print my CD package. And I, learned how to book tours and take care of a van on the road. And then I had a positive, fruitful experience with being on record labels and having a manager, having a publicist, having multiple agents. And then, and that was all, I think, smooth sailing. And then I think the real work of being an artist began when that stuff started to leave. And that's when I myself had to start getting creative about what skills did I have, who could help me with those, and how to keep the engine of the career going. And I have to say that this was also like a time where the internet was becoming more accessible for us. It was right at the beginning of mobile phones. And it was when we were leaving dial-up and going to broadband. And both of those technologies helped me incredibly navigate the other side of this bell curve. And I'd say the same thing about live streaming now. right? You know, this transition to what we're talking about is that I started live streaming in 2009 from my house as a way to raise money for a record. And the difference between live streaming in 2009 and what was possible with platforms and monetizing and even cameras is incredible to where we are now. And that's only been great for artists, I have to say.
Mm-hmm. So you started, the Cabin Fever series back in 2009, and that was you out by a creek with limited broadband. And part of what was fun about this is your activism on behalf of like FCC policies to improve broadband and wireless. So it's like you're living it at the same time that you're, working in it
in a very rural place. Yeah, I was actually on DSL until 2017. Yeah. I did not get, cable internet until 2017. And for a long time, I was one of the last houses on my road that could even get DSL.
Yeah.
And so that's, of course, why that was an interest in an issue of mine that I really wanted to care.
Yeah. So in terms of your kind of arc as a traditional kind of recording artist and touring artist, you've always struck me as sort of a great example of the cliche of, defining success in the new music economy is that you don't need to be known, by 5 million people. You need like 10,000 people to be like, core fans, like, or whatever that number is, just like a core group of people who are reliably going to turn out to your shows or reliably going to engage with your music. I mean, has that been one kind of vertical or one kind of thread that you've really been mindful of over the last 10, 15 years, like understanding your fan base and trying to resource them?
I wouldn't say that I had been necessarily mindful of them in the way that you're just describing until now.
Yeah.
Which is basically how I've thought entirely about the pandemic, which is that a lot of the things that I was doing for other reasons starting 10 years ago have then served me well in this situation, which is having that relationship with an audience that was built over the years through fan funding, through small shows, through social media, through many, many concerts, and having a diverse income that comes from lots of different places. Owning my master's, that was a project that I started 10 years ago. That's a boon in the pandemic. Mm-hmm. All of these things that I was doing to survive a music industry that was changing and a personal career that was changing 10 years ago, all those relationships have now been called in by the pandemic. And I can't say that I'm doing great right now, but I think I'm actually set up pretty good to weather the storm. I'm not alone in that. There are a lot of artists that have thought about those things. I certainly didn't anticipate a pandemic, but I was certainly thinking about who are these people? What are the things I can do? How do I take care of them?
Right. And I think that you and other artists, but I think I've always been really impressed by your intentionality around your responsibility as an artist and what your participation in certain business practices or business structures means in terms of how then those third-party businesses then get access to your fans by nature of their support of your work, and the complexities sort of built into the choices that artists don't really have. There are no choices now for artists. Artists are sort of, they have to go make certain alignments or else they're really not in the industry. And I don't know if that's something that you could speak to at all, or if that's something that you have thought more about.
Some of that is the, I recently did, just like the weekend that the sort of pandemic hit and everything got canceled was sort of this weekend that was a culmination of about 6 months of work for me, right? And it all got canceled. It was like a sort of collision of all these things we were talking about. It was sort of this weekend in Providence that was a performance of Miss You Like Hell, which is my musical, a talk back with me, a concert in Providence the next day, and then my writing partner, Tiara Alegria Hudy's coming to Brown University, where I'm a professor, to do a forum and talk to my students. And I got like the Providence Journal to do a feature on it. I got the Boston Globe to do a feature on it. It was sort of this it was all these things, right? And of course, that all gets canceled like the day before it's happening. But this is a long way around to say that the Globe feature had this headline to it. I don't know who writes these things, but it said, Erin McKeown juggles the demands of being not that famous. And it was not that famous was in quotes, as though I said that. And I don't quite remember saying that. It's like, is that a burn or is that not a burn? I'm not sure, Boston Globe. But the reason I thought about that is that I have had the blessing of being not that famous.
Right.
You know what I mean? Of having like a fan base that I can know more or less personally, and are sustaining me, but are not so large that they feel amorphous. And so their needs have always been very transparent to me. And for better or for worse, they've also been the same age as me. Mm-hmm. So I have been able to look at where I'm at in my life, and not every person that likes my music makes the same life choices as me, but there has been a synergy in like, what do I need out of my life and what does my audience need out of my life? And so I haven't ever had to make those decisions, quite honestly. Like, nobody ever offered me the car commercial.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or like, do you want to write a song for an oil company? I mean, those all seem, maybe easier choices. But to be honest, I would make a different choice at age 42 than I would at age 22. And maybe it's not, it's like at age 22, I would have said no, never. At age 42, I'd say sure. And let's give half that money to this organization and let's use this as a way. You know what I mean? There's a more skillful way to look at this partnership. But to answer the last part of your question, I mean, I don't know if those choices have kept me out of participating more in these business or not. I have to say I've just existed in this like world that's a little bit under the necessity of those choices, and it's actually been fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and this may be a bit of a tortured analogy, but I think we can use this to kind of pivot into some of the challenges we're facing now. I mean, I think one of the issues that you and I have talked about over the years was like there was a situation maybe I think 10 years ago or so where one of the major digital music platforms was basically able to run algorithms that then they could basically say, if you listen to so-and-so's music, you are more likely to be a Democrat, or if you listen to so-and-so's music, you're more likely to be a Republican. And they were packaging that user data and selling it to the Republican and the Democratic Party. And that felt like a little bit of an uncomfortable sort of expansion of what musicians had signed up for. Yeah, I didn't sign up for you to figure out who's my fan base and then sell that for political means. And I think there's a bit, again, it's a bit of a tortured analogy, but I think there's some commonalities in terms of what we're going to be looking at over the next year or year and a half with reopening. Because when people come to see you at a show, there's a little bit of an implication there that your community that supported you for 20 years, that you are bringing them into a space that you feel comfortable encouraging them to come into. And I'd love to talk a little bit about let's back up before we get into the weeds of that. So you typically are on the road, how many nights a year? How many were you going to be this year, give or take?
Yeah, in 2020 and 2019, I had made a decision to do more touring than I had in the previous years. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that still looks like 75 dates a year, which is much more than I was doing in the mid-2010s. But yeah, about 75 days a year.
And for those who haven't had a chance to follow Erin's career, one of the fun developments, which we'll get to at the end if we have time, is that Erin has had an expansion of her portfolio, and now, as she mentioned before, is a composer, was the co-creator of Miss You Like Hell, which is a very widely beloved musical that has been appearing at theater groups across the United States and other countries, I imagine, certainly the United States. So you've been able to kind of split your focus in terms of working on shows, doing new composing works, and then also doing your traditional recording and touring and that piece of it. So, but to get back to, so roughly 75 dates, that typically is you touring solo or with a couple of accompanists, typically like in the van. I mean, it's classic in the van touring. Have you started even to get your head around timing of reopening and even thinking about playing live again, given that you have a setup there where you can be playing live, by your creek whenever you want to?
Yeah, I don't have a really firm firm answer on that. There's the answer that is a business answer, and then there's an answer that's an emotional answer, and they're not the same right now. And I think until they're the same, I probably won't do anything. But right before the pandemic happened, I got a new agent, called Fleming Artists, and a wonderful 40+ year agency that I've admired for a long time. So it's been really great, although a strange time to join a new agency. But to soothe my mind, I think for me, I call it like the Corona 2-step, which is like cancel, reschedule, cancel, reschedule, cancel, reschedule. And like, I can't do that. Like emotionally, like I can't do that anymore. And because nobody knows, in my mind, I'm like, I'm not doing anything till 2021.
Right.
And I'm not gonna try. And I know that maybe that's not a great answer for the ecosystem of venues, but for me, that's what emotionally feels right now. And I'm thinking of ways to be able to get through this time until that can happen. The other piece of that is that my agency has started doing virtual shows. It's basically like started creating platforms for them, promoting them, pitching them as a product. So of course, like I said, I've been doing that for a long time, but now I have a business side to my career that is like, let's do virtual shows. Like, let's explore this. Let's see how it works. And I have given them a limit. I said I'll do one a month, and that feels right to me. And I'm gonna see how that works till the spring of 2021. I mean, that's as much as I know. If someone comes to me with some kind of offer that is a physical offer of a space to play, I'm not sure how that would work. I think the other thing that I know right now, to be honest, is like, I've played shows to 10 people, like because 10 people have come, not because that's all like socially distant can fit into a venue. And I don't want to do that.
Right.
I just, to be really honest. And I also don't want to play shows to people who are wearing masks. Like, I really have a really hard time anyway with the mask stuff. I mean, obviously I'm 100% on it from a public health standpoint, but in terms of like human experience and connection and emotion, I feel like I can't talk when I'm wearing one. I feel like no one can see me when I'm wearing one. It's like, I cannot imagine playing a show to a room full of people that are like this. And that's just the truth of where I'm at right now. And maybe that means I don't do a show for a while, or maybe it means I've been finding a lot of joy in the online shows. I always have. But I've been surprised at how much I really enjoy the ones I've done so far. So maybe that's the thing. Just to say something a little more positive about the future, I do think that what people are figuring out about online shows right now, which is anywhere from the nitty gritty of like technical platform stuff to what audiences want, what they'll pay for, how often will they go see something, what kind of artistic level they need to feel like they're really there, et cetera, et cetera. All that is going to benefit us when we go back to real life. I imagine a music business and a venue ecosystem where live streaming will be part of everything as we go forward. So with small amount of overhead, venues will be able to have a live streaming setup, or an artist will travel with a live streaming setup and be able to offer a virtual tier to, there's a lot of reasons why people are not going to be able to go to shows. And there's, like you mentioned before, there's a lot of things that didn't work about shows in the first place. So this is a way to get more people and people who shows were not accessible in the first place. And folks who, for various reasons, aren't going to be able to go out in public for a long time. So I think that's hopeful. That I feel like the live streams I'm doing now, or the things I'm learning and sharing with other artists, and the things we're figuring out as an agency and as venues are exploring their own live streaming stuff, is all going to benefit in the future.
Right. Well, I think that's super interesting, and I think everybody. The response to the pandemic is hitting everybody at a very personal level, and I don't think there's a lot of universality around it, and a lot has to do with your level of privilege, of what your work is, your family situation, access to technology. There are just so many layers upon layer in terms of how is affecting you, a person practically and emotionally. We were really all sort of taken aback, is that right? We were very moved by Dave Grohl's piece this past week in the Atlantic, which I don't know if you had a chance to see, but just around
I did, yeah.
a love letter to this live music experience, which has been so meaningful for so many people who are part of the music community and care about music. And again, that's genre agnostic and that's venue. I mean, different people, Merrick Keller's getting it through metal, I'm getting it through your shows, whatever. I mean, people get through different places. And again, the whole point of our Revs concept is we're not pushing for premature reopening. We're not, we're just saying at some point music is going to be allowed to come back. And we need it to be as quickly as possible. We need it to be as safely as possible. And then again, I think you spoke to this a little bit, but I want to unpack this a little bit more. We need our music workers to feel like they really know what the deal is. And we need our audiences to really know what the deal is. And we need to communicate with them in a way that we really have never tried to communicate before, except around, some of the safety issues after Pulse and after some of the festival. We've done versions of this before, but this is a little bit of a different conversation. And I know this is a really hard thing to speculate on. And I heard you just talking about like the mask and things like that. But is it possible to even kind of sketch out informally the kind of things that you would want to see from a venue or from a network of venues, or if you're routing a tour, and often tours you don't part of, like you're at a point in your career where you have the luxury of knowing most of the venues you play in, but many artists are just like, I don't know what this thing's going to look like or who's going to be working there. Can you just speak a little bit to like what you feel like you would want to hear, from your local public health, or not your local if you're on tour, but public health, from venues, like what should we be thinking about as we start this process?
Well, first of all, I want to say that one of the things that I've enjoyed so much about our work over the years is that the end goal is to empower artists to do what they choose, right? To give every artist the opportunity to make choices. So when that's baked in to this work, I think that's the ultimate goal, right? So it's like an artist wants to boycott something, an artist wants to benefit something, like that the ecosystem can hold all of that. So I think that also stands in this situation. I think as an artist, what I'd want to see is consistency. I think I'd want to see like some clear guidelines, enforcement of those guidelines, and consistency with it. The story that I think of is that, a week into the pandemic or right before I did a cabin fever, my internet went down. And so I couldn't figure out why, and I called Comcast, and I was number 213 in the queue on the phone. And then eventually somebody, but anyway, I make an appointment, and the whole day before, I get text messages, I get emails. This is the protocol. This is what's going to happen when the worker comes to your house. This is the safety things they're going to be wearing. This is what you should do. You need to call us if you have symptoms, like a whole thing, which I was like, great, absolutely great. And then the worker comes to my house and does none of those things. Right. And is it up to me to say to that guy who was great and really helped me, to say like, why aren't you wearing a mask? Wear your gloves. Stay away from, like all of that. So that inconsistency and the enforcement, that's what makes me feel, whether I'm an audience member or an artist, that's what makes me feel this isn't going to work. So if that can be communicated, and if that can be, I think it's a collaboration between, as you said, like public health and venue, but if it's consistent, if it's enforced, and if it's clear, I think folks will have the information they need to choose. If Comcast had said to me, if a guy might wear a mask and he could not have gloves on, you want him to come? I'd be like, I don't know. This is like, really early in the pandemic when everybody was really freaked out. So I think that's what I would want and need. And I think obviously also some better communication. I just, without being specific, there's a venue that I still have a IRL show with on the calendar, and I've been pushing to make it online. And like I heard through a friend of a friend, and then later that they were thinking about making it in person, but no one told me that. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's yeah. So being generous to the fact that everybody's like shit is falling down, I understand how that can happen. But I think moving forward, consistency, communication, and enforcement. I hate that word, but that's really what it is. Don't leave it to me to police the stage.
And I think, Erin, that is such an important point because, again, we all are completely in solidarity with, the Independent Venue Association and the fight to save our music ecosystem and our fight to save independent venues. And this could not be a bigger priority for all of us. And at the same time, we can all acknowledge that if you are a professional touring musician or a friend of touring musicians, you have heard story after story about complicated venue relationships or that person at the venue that did X, Y, Z, or that thing that was unsanitary or the thing, whatever. So I think, again, part of the concept behind Revs is like, let's try to be, we can't be hiding stuff under the rug, right? We have to be transparent about what are all the different dynamics at play here that we can try to get on top of. And that, I think the music worker piece is something that we really lift up. And again, we use music worker to include, lighting crews and people who help and sell merch and people who work at venues. And, those people they are the music community. They're a huge part of the community and we need to treat them as such. So it's going to be interesting.
I think the last thing that I would say is that going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation about where my career started, I'm going to have a backup plan. Right. I'm going to have a plan for how I want my merch to run at a venue. I'm going to have a plan of how I want to keep myself safe in the case of a venue that's not doing it, or in the case of someplace where public health situation isn't clear, I want those people to take the lead. Again, like I said, like consistency, communication, like enforcement, but I'm also going to be prepared as an artist to take care of myself. And that's
All right. I'm going to throw you I don't know if it's a pun to say this as a curveball, but Erin, of course, is one of the great sports fans in the world and writes and talks extensively about sports. And you want baseball back?
No.
You want him to take the year?
Yeah, I want him to take the year. I don't want to see baseball in a bubble. I don't want to see baseball without fans. I don't know if that's I don't know, if it's a sports talk show, then I'm just going to take an extreme stand for the sake of the conversation and just say no. I think we've seen with the stuff that's happened with Premier League and some of the European soccer leagues, how troublesome it is already. I don't know how it works. I don't know how that works. I don't know how the NFL works. I'm embracing the spiritual thing of take a breath.
Yeah. Awesome. Where should people follow you other than your website?
Always on Twitter, Erin McKeown, at Erin McKeown, and Instagram, Erin X McKeown. Always having fun stuff, posting pictures of the river, house, and the fern.
Awesome. Erin, thank you for joining us. And again, thanks to everybody who gave over your hour today. Thanks to Shelle Sanchez. Thanks always to Alex Dolvin. Thank you to our partners at Music Cities Together, Don Pitts, Kate Becker, Ashley Keaton, Quinta Constance, and others who I'm forgetting who are going to yell at me. We really appreciate you coming. Comments, suggestions, hit us up at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com. We will be posting the archive of this program over the weekend, and so feel free to share this with your friends and colleagues and neighbors if you are so inclined. Today is release day for the new album of our good friend Tao Nguyen of Tao and the Get Down, Stay Down. And next Friday, Tao and her manager, Joe Goldberg, are going to join us and talk about some of their perspectives on trying to release an album during the shutdown and how do we navigate this on the creative and audience engagement side as well. So that'll be super fun, and we're looking forward to that. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next week.